I ain't see anybody talking about that. Not at all. And it's wild because the second that I heard about it, I knew it was wrong. I felt it in my bones. I felt like he had been taken. And he just found each one of their little niches and turned it on. Because when the cameras went off, he kept it up.
They told us Malcolm-Jamal Warner drowned while saving his daughter. That's the story the headlines sold us. A tragic accident, a father's last act of love. But what if I told you there's another version of events? One involving a spiked drink, shadowy figures watching from the balcony, and 2 missing phones that could hold the truth. According to Jaguar Wright, this wasn't a rip current, it was a hit. And the more you hear, the harder it is to believe the official story. Malcolm Jamal Warner was no ordinary Hollywood figure. Many grew up watching him on The Cosby Show, where he became a household name. But unlike some in the entertainment industry, Malcolm built a reputation for being grounded, disciplined, and deeply principled. He refused to participate in the humiliation rituals that many whispered about in the industry, and he openly criticized the men in dresses agenda he believed was being pushed by powerful forces in Hollywood. He stayed true to himself, working on his own terms and speaking his mind about the darker side of the business. One of his most recent projects was his podcast, Nah, Not All Hood, where he challenged the harmful stereotypes that the media has long attached to Black life. On the show, Malcolm discussed the diversity and richness of the Black community, emphasizing that they are not a monolith. He talked about how Hollywood and the music industry often profit from division, dysfunction, and chaos, and he called for healing, accountability, and growth. He was particularly critical of the modern hip-hop industry, calling out its toxic glorification of violence, misogyny, and the lack of emotional responsibility. It was the kind of message that didn't sit well with those who benefit from keeping these cycles alive. So, when news broke that Malcolm had drowned in Costa Rica while swimming with his daughter, many immediately felt something was off. The official story didn't sit right. The beach where the incident took place is known for deadly riptides, minimal safety funding, and volunteer-only lifeguards. Locals know it's not a place for casual swimming, especially with children. For someone as responsible and level-headed as Malcolm to decide to take his daughter into such dangerous waters seemed out of character. And then, the story began to change. Initial reports claimed he drowned while trying to save his daughter. But a few days later, the Costa Rican Judicial Investigation Department released a different statement. Now, they said Malcolm had been at the shore playing with his daughter, then left her on the sand before entering the water with a friend. That's when the currents swept them both away. The friend made it back safely. Malcolm did not. And here's where things get strange. There were not 1, not 2, but 3 doctors on the beach that day. They managed to save the other man. But for some reason, they could not save Malcolm, even though he was described as a strong swimmer in peak physical condition. This is where Jaguar Wright enters the conversation. She claims that Malcolm's death was not an accident, but the result of a deliberate plan. According to her, his drink was spiked with something that caused hallucinations or disorientation. Once the substance took effect, he was led into the water and left to drown. Wright points out that he was extremely fit and trained, making it highly unlikely that he would simply panic and drown without some outside factor. She also alleges that Malcolm had been followed for a long time before his death, and that there had even been break-ins at his home. Though he reported the incidents to the police, he continued to feel as though someone was watching him. Jaguar's claims go further. She says that on the day of his death, Malcolm's wife stayed behind at the hotel while he went to the beach with their daughter. That decision, whether intentional or not, meant he had no one to watch his back. She also claims there is a missing piece of evidence. A voicemail from his wife warning him that she saw strange faces looking up at their hotel balcony shortly before the incident. This message, she says, was left on Malcolm's phone. But when his body and belongings were returned to the family, the phone was missing. Even more suspicious, his wife's phone was also stolen. According to Wright, this is not a coincidence, but a calculated move to erase vital evidence. Fans have been quick to connect the dots. Some point out that Malcolm, named after Malcolm X, had faced random phone calls and threats leading up to his death. And they compare the circumstances to how Malcolm X was targeted before his assassination. Others speculate that the friend who was with him in the water, if that person was indeed a doctor, as some reports claim, could have injected him with something to incapacitate him before letting the current take him. These are, of course, theories, but they are fueled by the inconsistencies and contradictions in the official reports. Jaguar Wright insists that powerful people are working to twist the narrative and cover up what really happened. She believes that conflicting accounts, missing devices, and a sudden shift in the official timeline all point to something much darker than an innocent vacation tragedy. And the motive? She suggests it may lie in Malcolm's refusal to be controlled, his criticism of the industry's exploitation of Black culture, and his commitment to speaking uncomfortable truths. At first, the headlines seemed straightforward. News outlets from all over rushed to report the same heartbreaking tale. Malcolm Jamal Warner, beloved actor and cultural voice, had drowned off the coast of Costa Rica while swimming with his daughter. The images painted were emotional: crystal blue waters, a strong father braving deadly currents, and a sudden, tragic ending. But when the shock wore off, some people started asking questions, and those questions only multiplied as new details emerged. What makes this case so unsettling isn't just the tragedy itself. It's how quickly the story began to change. Within days, the official narrative shifted. Witness accounts conflicted. And hidden in those shifting details were strange coincidences. The presence of 3 doctors on the scene, the inability to save Malcolm despite his known athleticism, and the fact that another man who entered the water with him somehow survived. To those paying attention, it didn't add up. Then came Jaguar Wright, an outspoken figure unafraid to call out what she sees as the entertainment industry's darkest secrets. She didn't just doubt the official story, she dismantled it piece by piece. According to Wright, Malcolm's death was premeditated. She claims his drink was drugged, impairing his judgment and leaving him vulnerable. Once the effects took hold, she alleges he was guided into the water, the perfect place for an accident no one could disprove. Her claims go even deeper. Wright insists that Malcolm knew he was being followed in the weeks leading up to his death. There had been break-ins at his home. Strange faces had been spotted near places he stayed. And, most chillingly, she says that on the day of his death, Malcolm's wife sent him a voicemail warning him about suspicious men staring up at their hotel balcony. That message, Wright says, could be the key to understanding what really happened. But that key has vanished. What's important to remember here is that Malcolm wasn't just another celebrity on vacation. He was a man with a history of speaking uncomfortable truths about the entertainment industry, truths that didn't make him popular among certain powerful circles. He refused to play into the narratives Hollywood wanted, refused to be the yes man they could control, and refused to compromise his principles for a paycheck. That kind of integrity can inspire, but it can also make you a target. His podcast, Nah, Not All Hood, wasn't just entertainment. It was a platform for real talk, conversations about how the media manipulates public perception, how hip-hop has been twisted to promote destruction instead of growth, and how Black culture has been reduced to stereotypes for profit. He wasn't afraid to name the problem, that the messages getting the most exposure were the ones tearing communities apart. And when someone with Malcolm's platform and clarity speaks like that, people listen. And those benefiting from the chaos notice. That's why Jaguar Wright's claims hit so hard. She's not just saying something bad happened on that beach, she's painting a picture of a man systematically isolated, monitored, and put in a position where no one could protect him. The missing phones, the changing stories, the conveniently timed absence of his wife, it all becomes part of a much darker puzzle. And once you start connecting the pieces, it's difficult to stop. Then there's the matter of the so-called witnesses. How is it that 3 trained doctors could be on that beach, able to save the other man caught in the current, yet somehow failed to save Malcolm? Jaguar questions whether they were witnesses at all, or whether their role in that moment was something else entirely. Because if you accept her theory that Malcolm was already incapacitated before he entered the water, then CPR wouldn't have worked. He wasn't fighting to breathe because of water. He was already gone. For those who loved Malcolm, this isn't just about conspiracy theories. It's about dignity. It's about refusing to accept a story that doesn't add up, refusing to let a principled man's legacy be reduced to a tragic accident without asking the hard questions. Because if Jaguar Wright is right, if this was a deliberate act, then the truth isn't just buried under conflicting reports. It's being guarded by people who never want it uncovered. And while Jaguar's words have stirred controversy, they've also sparked something else, a collective unease among fans who have followed Malcolm's career for decades. People aren't just mourning, they're questioning. They're replaying interviews, combing through old clips, listening for moments when Malcolm hinted that he knew his days might be numbered. And when you look at it through that lens, certain statements feel less like casual commentary and more like quiet warnings. The eerie part is how quickly everything was wrapped up. One moment, news outlets were flooding social media with the drowning headline. The next, the story had faded from mainstream conversation entirely, replaced by the next trending topic. For a man of Malcolm's stature, with his history, his work, and his impact, the lack of sustained coverage is almost as suspicious as the circumstances themselves. It's as if the narrative was set, locked in place, and then buried before too many people could dig. But people are digging. Fans, independent journalists, and truth seekers are refusing to let this case fade into obscurity. They're demanding to know what was on those phones, why the story changed, and who benefits from Malcolm being gone. Because until those questions are answered, the rip currents off that Costa Rican beach won't just be dangerous waters. They'll be a symbol of the unseen forces that can pull even the strongest among us under. That's when the currents swept them both away. The friend made it back safely. Malcolm did not. And here's where things get strange. There were not one, not two, but 3 doctors on the beach that day. They managed to save the other man. But for some reason, they could not save Malcolm, even though he was described as a strong swimmer in peak physical condition. This is where Jaguar Wright enters the conversation. She claims that Malcolm's death was not an accident, but the result of a deliberate plan. According to her, his drink was spiked with something that caused hallucinations or disorientation. Once the substance took effect, he was led into the water and left to drown. Wright points out that he was extremely fit and trained, making it highly unlikely that he would simply panic and drown without some outside factor. She also alleges that Malcolm had been followed for a long time before his death, and that there had even been break-ins at his home. Though he reported the incidents to the police, he continued to feel as though someone was watching him. Jaguar's claims go further. She says that on the day of his death, Malcolm's wife stayed behind at the hotel while he went to the beach with their daughter. It's as if the narrative was set, locked in place, and then buried before too many people could dig. But people are digging. Fans, independent journalists, and truth seekers are refusing to let this case fade into obscurity. They're demanding to know what was on those phones, why the story changed, and who benefits from Malcolm being gone. Because until those questions are answered, the rip currents off that Costa Rican beach won't just be dangerous waters. They'll be a symbol of the unseen forces that can pull even the strongest among us under. In the end, whether you believe Jaguar Wright's allegations or not, one thing is clear. The official story leaves too many questions unanswered. Malcolm-Jamal Warner was more than an actor. He was a voice of principle, a man who refused to bow to the pressures of an industry built on control. And if his death was truly a setup, then the fight for the truth isn't just about one man. It's about protecting every voice brave enough to stand against the tide. Until those missing pieces of evidence surface, the shadow over Malcolm's final moments will remain. And so will the people who refuse to stop asking why.